So this is the LG V30. This is LG's big flagship for the second half of 2017, and the LG V series of smartphones has always been about photography, videography, and audio, and that's what makes the LG V30 so exciting, and we'll get into all that stuff. But first, let's get all the basic smartphone stuff out of the way. Starting off with the specs, you have a Snapdragon 835 processor, 4 GB of RAM, and it also comes with 64 gigs of internal storage standard, but there's also a Plus model which will vary by region that comes with 128 GB of internal storage, but there's also a micro SD card slot if you need more. Now, as far as performance goes, it's very fast. It performs just as well as you would expect for a flagship phone. It's fast, it's fluid, it's very responsive, it's fast to launch apps, it's quick to multitask, it's also really good at playing graphically intensive games without any stuttering or slowdown. So I've had no issues with the performance of the V30. It performs extremely well in day-to-day use and even in heavy use. Like most phones that we're seeing in 2017, the LG V30 is water and dust resistant. It's IP68, which means it's protected for up to 1.5 meters for up to 30 minutes. So this means you can use it in the rain or drop it in a puddle of water and it'll be perfectly fine. The fingerprint sensor of the V30 is on the back and it's nice and centered, so it's easy to reach with your index finger, and it's a very fast and accurate fingerprint sensor. I haven't had any issues with it, but what I really enjoy about LG's implementation with their fingerprint sensor is that it also doubles as the power key, and this is something that LG has been doing for a while now, and I kind of really wish that more manufacturers would adopt this feature. Like previous LG V series smartphones, the V30 is military 810G transit drop compliant, which means it's much more durable against drops, but I still don't recommend dropping this phone because it's a really pretty looking phone. Now, unlike the V10 and V20, which arguably had a more industrial and more unique design, the V30's design is a little bit more elegant and more mainstream and is very similar to a lot of smartphones in terms of design and what we're seeing in 2017. So it has glass on the front, glass on the back, and a metal frame that wraps around the sides, and I really like the design of the V30. I think it's a very good looking phone. It feels extremely comfortable in the hand as well, with the rounded corners and the slightly tapered back. The glass back obviously does mean that it collects a lot of fingerprints, but that's just sort of to be expected when you have a phone that's made predominantly of glass. This new design also means that the battery is no longer removable, which to me is not that big of a deal, and battery life on the LG V30 has been extremely good. It has a pretty decently sized 3300 milliamp hour battery, which has been enough to get me through a full day, whether I'm using the phone more casually with a lot of texting, web browsing, and social media, maybe a couple YouTube videos here and there, or even if I'm using it really heavily and playing a lot of games, watching a lot of YouTube, taking a lot of photos, it still lasts me comfortably all day, and screen on time typically hovered around the 5-hour mark. On the front, LG has made some pretty significant changes to the display. It is now a 6-inch OLED display with quad HD resolution and an aspect ratio of 18:9. LG is calling this the full vision display, which is really just a fancy buzzword for a screen that goes edge to edge and has really thin bezels around all sides. Now, the 6-inch screen may sound really massive, but because of the thinner bezels and the aspect ratio that makes the screen less wide, it actually doesn't feel like a 6-inch screen smartphone in your hand. The screen itself looks absolutely gorgeous, and I'm really happy that LG has gone back to using OLED. The screen is very vibrant and colorful. It has great viewing angles. It's pretty easy to see outdoors as well. Everything just looks incredible on this display, and the corners are rounded just like it was on the G6, but they're actually properly rounded this time, whereas the G6 looked a little bit funky. But this is a beautiful looking screen, and it can easily give Samsung a run for its money. It is that good of a screen. The other big difference with the V30 screen is that it no longer has a secondary display like the V10 and the V20 did, and because the secondary display is gone now, it's actually been replaced with a software feature called the floating bar, and I actually like this a lot better because the floating bar can be repositioned to where you can easily reach it, whereas the secondary display, it was always at the top where it was kind of hard to get to and it was a little bit uncomfortable. And the floating bar does all the same stuff that the secondary screen did, so you still have access to app shortcuts, quick contacts, media controls, etc. And because it's a software feature, you can actually disable it if you don't want it, whereas the secondary display, you are pretty much stuck with it whether you like liked it or not. The rest of the software is pretty typical LG. The icons are still very bright and colorful, and the whole entire UI is still somewhat cartoony, and there's still some weird animations like the stretch effect that you get from swiping between home screen to home screen, but you can, however, switch things up a bit with the theme engine and sort of change up the look and feel of the UI if you don't like the way it looks by default. And something I also really enjoy with the V30 is the always on display feature. It's highly customizable with a bunch of different clocks, and there's also a ton of preloaded images that you can use to customize the always on display, or you can use an image from your own gallery, which I thought was really cool. It's running Android Nougat out of the box right now, which I thought was a little bit weird, especially since last year they were able to launch the V20 with the latest version of Android, but I guess they couldn't pull the same trick off this year, so hopefully it'll get updated to Android Oreo pretty soon. Now, the two big centerpieces to the V30 is audio and the camera. Let's start with audio first, and for starters, yes, it does have a headphone jack, so no adapter required here to use your favorite pair of headphones. And this year, the headphone jack has been moved to the top, whereas the V10 and V20 had it on the bottom. I personally prefer it at the bottom. I think it's a much more convenient location, but it's not really that big of a deal, just something to keep in mind. There's also a 32-bit hi-fi quad DAC inside, and unlike the G6 where it was a region exclusive, all versions of the V30 will have a quad DAC, and all of them will also be tuned by B&O. Some of the benefits that you get from the quad DAC is less noise, less distortion, and much better dynamic range, and can also properly drive a high impedance pair of headphones. And you don't necessarily need a pair of high impedance headphones to hear the difference, but that will give you the best audio quality possible. And audio quality on the V30 is just absolutely incredible. It sounds amazing, and it's pretty much unparalleled by any other smartphone with the exception of maybe the U11, but the audio quality is fantastic. I think a lot of audiophiles will really enjoy what the V30 can provide with that quad DAC. Another feature on the V30 that a lot of people will really like is the support for MQA, which stands for Master Quality Authenticated, and this basically allows you to stream high-res audio at a much smaller file size, so it's not going to kill your bandwidth. And right now there aren't a ton of streaming services that support it, but Tidal is one of the most notable ones. So if you have a Tidal subscription and you have the proper subscription tier, you can take advantage of this feature right away. aptX support is also on board, which is Qualcomm's high-res audio codec for wireless or Bluetooth devices. Android Oreo has this feature natively built in, but LG was able to implement it regardless. So if you want high-res audio over Bluetooth devices, you have that option as well. Alright, so let's talk about those cameras. So you have dual cameras on the back. The main sensor is a 16 megapixel sensor with f1.6 aperture, which makes it the brightest lens on a smartphone right now, and it also has optical image stabilization. The secondary sensor is a wide-angle lens at 13 megapixels at f1.9. No OAS here, but it doesn't really need it because it's such a wide angle and the focus is set to infinity. There's a couple of new features with this camera. The biggest one is the ability to shoot log footage, and log footage is something you typically find on a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, and this basically lets you shoot a completely flat image that has much better dynamic range, so you can manipulate it a lot heavier in post in terms of color grading and color correcting. But the log footage on the V30 is not really all it's cracked up to be. It's really nice to have, but the bit rate is extremely low, and it also is a very green image, so it's very tough to color grade, very tough to color correct. It's hard to get the skin tones and everything to look natural, and because the bit rate is so low, it's kind of hard to push things around without the image falling apart. So it's definitely not all it's cracked up to be, and it could have been a lot better. If you don't want to deal with post-production, which I don't think a lot of people do, there's another feature called Cine Video that allows you to apply color grading presets directly in camera, and it's very simple, very quick and easy to do, and gives you the desired look that you want in just a couple of seconds. As far as picture quality goes, the photos are vibrant, colorful, with plenty of detail, and I don't think the V30 over sharpens quite as much as previous LG phones, but the dynamic range is definitely not as good as something like Samsung's camera. It does have the tendency to overexpose in a lot of different situations. Now, as expected, the wide angle lens is not as good as the main sensor in terms of quality, but it is a ton of fun to use. I really enjoy using the wide angle lens because you can get some really breathtaking landscape shots. Group photos are a lot easier to take as well. There's just a ton of situations where that wide angle lens really does come in handy. It does struggle a lot more in low light. The photos are a lot softer and the white balance is not quite as good, but they did at least fix the barrel distortion. You don't have that GoPro-like look. The photos look a lot more normal now, which I really appreciate. But if you're really concerned about quality in low light, I definitely recommend sticking to the main sensor, as the photos are a lot sharper, they're more detailed, and the white balance and overall color is a lot better. Pricing for the LG V30 starts around $800, and that price will vary depending on carrier, and it's pretty typical flagship price, and I think the LG V30 is worth every penny. It has a beautiful design, a gorgeous display, and the audio, photography, and videography experience is just on a whole nother level when it comes to smartphones. And a lot of people have been underrating the V series over the last couple of years, and it's about time people paid attention to it, because the V30 is doing a lot of really big things and it's doing them extremely well. So give the V30 a look. You might be very impressed by what you find. So that wraps up our review of the LG V30. I hope you all enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, which is also down below, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And of course, check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+, all that good stuff will be linked down below. And check out the website as well, androidauthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.